In an endless ocean of darkness, there was a presence that was aware of itself and that it existed. It saw a beautiful blaze of light and energy, and it felt in ecstasy and absolute peace simultaneously. It didn't remember what it was or from when it existed like this, but it was as if it had been for all eternity. In one moment, the strange, shining force in front of the soul began to slowly condense and form a spherical, radiant shape. From it came a thick, echoing voice that said gently and friendly, "You are a brave, brave soul, Gren." "I am Gren," the consciousness asked and realized it could speak. "You were and still are to some extent." "Am I dead?" "The body you had is dead." "Yes." "So you are God?" "To some extent, yes. I am one of the deities. Your brave death and self-sacrifice brought you to me. I take care of the souls of great warriors." "So, I was a great warrior?" I don't remember anything," said Gren's soul, confused. "I can show you if you want, but be prepared, because your story is both beautiful and heroic, as well as brutally cruel." I want to know." The bright radiance began to approach and suck in the shapeless spirit, who now knew that it had once been called Gren. On the high protective wall of the mountain monastery, called Hill Saint, the hundreds of trained warriors there watched silently towards a huge army, positioned about 300 meters from them, preparing for an attack. It was composed of large fighters in heavy steel armor and weapons of all kinds, as well as war machines and catapults. The locals had called it the Iron Army because of its strength and ruthlessness, as well as the heavy equipment of its numerous soldiers. The commander of the unit, which was now preparing to attack the monastery, was riding a huge, scaly creature, similar to a rhinoceros, and shouted commands to his subordinates in an incomprehensible language, waving a heavy mace. The Iron Army had appeared a few weeks ago in these lands. The invaders had come by sea with huge ships of steel and wood to the coastal village of Richport and had seized and burned it within hours. The local people presumed that the barbarians were from another land beyond the ocean, and that they had somehow managed to build ships large and sturdy enough to cross the stormy waters, as well as to protect themselves from the multitude of sea monsters that inhabited them. After Richport, the capture of 3 more cities followed, and 2 days ago, the capital, Gatown. Now, they had sent a large detachment to attack the fortress of Hill Saint, which was located about 30 kilometers from the populous city, in the nearby mountain range. The monastery had the task of creating the best and elite warriors in these lands, preparing them from a young age, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. Its best alumni became generals, commanders, and leaders of the Royal Guard, and some remained to become teachers and advisors to the future elite fighters. But now, the monk soldiers faced the heavy task of dealing with the Iron Army and protecting Hill Saint and its inhabitants. On the high protective wall of the stone fortress, 2 men were speaking quietly amongst themselves, and from time to time they issued orders to their remaining soldiers, who quickly and precisely carried them out. The older of the 2 commanders was dressed in a robe, not armor, and despite the situation had a calm, serious expression. He was the teacher Glau, the head of the monastery, and occupied the highest position in the hierarchy there. The man on his right was Gren, a trusted first advisor and closest subordinate. This warrior looked about 40, with a well-developed musculature and a fearless, handsome face, which radiated strength and confidence. Everyone had heard the horrifying stories of the Iron Army and had lost many brothers to their swords and axes. Now was the moment to see in reality what their enemies were capable of and to measure their strength against them. Although he was worried for the safety of his family, who lived behind the walls, Gren was eager for the battle to begin. In an instant, the drumbeats of the Iron Army became rhythmic and louder. Their warriors began to utter fierce shouts in rhythm. Their loud voices in the distance were very intimidating. In the line of numerous barbarians, a space opened and 3 massive catapults were pushed forward. The war machines were quickly loaded with heavy iron spheres with spikes on the sides. The beats and shouts stopped, and a few seconds later the catapults fired. The 3 spherical bombs flew towards the walls of the monastery, hitting them with tremendous force and exploding. In the 3 places where the defenders had been hit, bodies, stones, and dirt flew. Gren was thrown to the ground by the explosions, and his ears began to ring. When he recovered and looked around, he saw the damage to the fortress. It was completely destroyed in the places where the powerful bombs had fallen. Teacher Glau was lying a few meters away, motionless, and several of his soldiers were trying to lift him and bring him back to consciousness. Gren rushed towards him to see how badly he was injured. At that moment, the drums of their enemies again beat rhythmically, and the enemy soldiers took up their terrifying battle cry and rhythm. They began to march quickly towards the monastery, ready to storm through the destroyed wall. Gren leaned over Glau and saw that the commander had a large wound on his head, on the side, where a stone from the explosion had hit him. He put his ear to his chest to hear a breath or a heartbeat through his robe, but there was none. His close friend, teacher, and companion was dead. The warrior had no time to think, to grieve, or to try to help him. The barbarians were quickly approaching the breach wall, and were many times more numerous than the monk fighters. Gren had to take command of his people in this battle, which already seemed doomed. The new commander shouted a few quick orders to his men. His idea was to position archers on the remaining intact walls around the holes from the explosions, to shower the numerous fighters of the Iron Army with arrows from their bows. At the places where the fortress was completely destroyed, he ordered warriors with large, heavy shields and spears to stand. They would try to stop the penetration of the attackers behind the walls. All of this happened within minutes, because their enemies were marching quickly and confidently forward. The commander of the Iron Army detachment, riding his terrifying creature, was also moving towards a fortress, but further back in the ranks. He apparently saw what strategy the defenders had, and began to shout commands with his hoarse, terrifying voice in a language unknown to Gren. The attacking soldiers instantly formed a battle formation, raising their heavy shields of steel and with above their heads to protect themselves. They formed a protective wall around themselves and continued to advance towards the monastery, now separated by tens of meters from the wide holes and debris on the ground. Gren ordered his archers to attack. Their arrows instantly flew and rained down on the first ranks of the rapidly advancing enemies. Some of them fell, hit on the ground, with furious cries, where the arrows managed to penetrate by chance between the heavy shields, but the casualties were too few. The new commander ordered his subordinates on the walls to fire at will, and quickly descended the steps of the half-destroyed wall to join his brothers at the holes. They were lined up in readiness there, raising shields and spears. The brave man made his way to the front lines, while some of his comrades patted him and nodded to him for courage. The chief commander stood next to his brothers and raised his shield, ready for battle. The Iron Army reached the destroyed fortress and poured through the holes. Gren was now face to face with his enemies. They were large, heavily armored, and numerous. At such close proximity, the greenish skin of their faces under their helmets, their crooked yellow teeth, and their black, tar-like eyes could be clearly seen. The barbarians fought fiercely and seemed to have no fear, either of the elite monk spears, nor of pain, injury, or death. Gren was one of the best fighters in these lands. He possessed both tremendous physical strength, as well as speed, dexterity, and agility, which were almost superhuman. He had participated in numerous battles, and had been trained since he was young. In the battle, he managed to pierce dozens of his enemies, only receiving minor injuries and cuts. But the Iron Army was too numerous. More and more enemies were entering through the destroyed walls. Where one of them fell, 2 new ones quickly appeared. Although the soldiers of Hill Saint were elite, the battle seemed impossible for the commander. Many of his brothers were falling, slain or badly wounded, fighting at the limit of their strength. The hellish carnage had been going on for about half an hour now. Gren, in the heat of battle, had not felt that he was badly injured. He had received a wound in the abdominal area, but he felt no pain and was still strong. One of his men nearby, however, noticed a wound in his stomach and began to shout that the commander was mortally wounded. Several of the monk fighters grabbed him and began to pull him back. while he furiously repeated to leave him and that nothing was wrong with him. One of his soldiers said, while they were dragging him further from the battle, "Commander, go inside to your family to say goodbye. We won't last much longer. Go to your family." Gren looked the young man in the eyes for a few seconds and understood that he was right. The Hill Saint Monastery was going to fall that night, and everyone inside would die or be enslaved. Then he hugged his comrade with one arm and patted him on the back of his leather armor. He did not need any more convincing. The wounded commander turned limping and walked, already weak, down a street toward the interior of the monastery to say goodbye to his family. The sounds of the battle slowly became fainter and fainter, as did he himself. The memory began to fade and disappear, turning again into an endless sea of darkness, until it completely disappeared and Gren returned to the bright radiance. "Enough for now," said the familiar deep voice. "I think you understood the situation. But wait, I wanted to see my family. Bring me back. Please, bring me back to see them. Did they survive? Please, don't tell me that." The soul could not finish because the radiance interrupted him. "I am sorry. Both you and your family perished that night. You will have more opportunities to remember everything. For now, that's enough. There isn't much time, so listen carefully." "Wait, what do you mean by more opportunities? What is happening here? Do you want something from me?" the consciousness wondered. "Yes," said the voice of the deity solemnly. "I want you to participate in a competition which I myself created for the souls of the greatest warriors. I want you to measure your strength against fighters from other worlds, to pass through all the obstacles and to win, because you are worthy to represent the human species. If you succeed and truly prove yourself and win with dignity, you will take my place, to take care of the souls of all creatures and warriors after their deaths, until you decide that it is time to find your worthy replacement, just as I want now. A competition? But what is this competition?" the warrior's soul asked excitedly. He was afraid to ask what would happen if he refused. "The competition will test every aspect of your spirit in order to win the strongest and worthiest warrior, who will succeed me. You will have a little time to decide. If you want to join, take the bracelet. If you decide to refuse, well, then even I am not sure what exactly will happen." "A bracelet? What bracelet?" Gren murmured, confused. After a while, he felt how he was beginning to slowly materialize. He felt the familiar feeling of being, again, in his own strong body, and the radiance, with which he had spoken until now, began to shrink until it revealed a thick golden, beautifully decorated bracelet with several blue-green stones that shone alluringly. The man hesitated for a second, then decided that he wanted to be alive again, and reached out to deftly grab the ornament with his hand, which he already felt he had. In an instant, everything disappeared and Gren lost consciousness. The chosen fighter felt that he was lying half-naked on the ground, feeling the damp grass beneath him, as well as its strange scent. Someone was frantically pushing him with gentle, but fear-numbed hands to wake up, and he heard a frightened female voice, which almost sobbed. "Please wake up. They are coming. Help me, they are coming."